I feel inspired by what we've seen today. And as our panellists come up, I'll just invite them up. Janet Albrechtson, if Janet would come back. Brendan O'Neill, if he's here. Scott Hargraves, Professor Simon Haines, Dr. Bella Abrera, and Professor Jeffrey Banks. We're just going to invite them up for a final comment. And while we're assembling the chairs, it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge one of our great Australians who has entered the room, and we will be hearing from a little bit later on with a special presentation. But please, everybody in the room, join with me and acknowledge the presence of Dr. Gina Rinehart, AO. Gina, thank you. That'll do. Yeah. Always lovely to see you, Mrs. Rinehart. So, and we'll begin, John, with you. Well, just come on up, please. Just find a seat, sit down. It's a final informal thought for the day. It's been a powerful day. And thank you to everybody who stayed and contributed. It's been really significant. So I'm going to pose this question to you. Just grab, we can start with you, John, because you started off our morning and you can set the tone. Now, in 3 minutes or less, for our esteemed panellists, in 3 minutes or less, your variation or interpretation of this question to leave our audience with today. What is it that we can do to ensure that Australia's continuing prosperity is locked in and our people can continue to flourish? Your interpretation of that question and your answer. What is it we can do? John first.
The first thing we have to do is to move away from our cynicism. It's one thing to be sceptical about our political masters and the political process and what happens in our world around us, but when we allow it to decay into cynicism, everything starts to rot. You can't do anything. And I can understand why people are cynical. I can understand why they've given up. I can understand why they would want to exercise what's known as the Benedict option, but it's not good enough. We have to be engaged. To be engaged, we need to be informed. I'm a great believer in the John Stuart Mill line to the effect that no matter how strongly you hold your position, unless you understand your opponent's argument, your position is of little value. So you need to be reading widely. We've talked a lot about our young people not reading. We need to be readers. We need to be understanding the debate, and then we need to turn up. Whether it's being here today and interacting, whether it's going home with some messages, whether it's being willing to ask the hard questions when people say silly things in the pub, always better to start with questions. In this day and age of fragility, if they don't like it, they just get up and walk out. Have you seen people do that? They won't engage. Ask them questions. That's much harder, much harder. And you'll realise how quickly their perspectives often just fall apart because they're just somehow imbibed. They're not thought through. So man your stations. Good luck.
John, thank you. Janet, you've got the microphone in your hand, so why not?
One thing that I think we can never do enough of is to celebrate our great leaders. I think sometimes we are reticent about truly celebrating the great Australians that we are fortunate enough to have in this country. And yes, I'm going to put a plug in because on the 15th of July 1964, 60 years ago in a couple of months, the Australian was first set up. And it has transformed, I mean, I'm biased, of course, but it has transformed the nation because it has remained true to that very first editorial that Rupert Murdoch wrote himself, and that was that prosperity depended on us speaking out, it depended on us speaking honestly, it depended on us speaking fearlessly and criticising when we needed to, but also praising when we needed to. And in the last sentence of that editorial, he wrote, please come join our company of progress. Well, I have one project, and that is to reclaim the word progressive. It should be our word. All of those words, diversity, inclusion, they're our words, and we need to redefine them back to what they really do mean. And if we do that, I think we'll be on the right path.
Can I dovetail onto that, Janet? You're talking about what can we do? Be heard. I get asked all the time, what can I do? What can I do? Be heard. Because if you're not heard, if you're only prepared to whinge to your friends and go, oh gosh, we're all headed for disaster, then we are going to end up with the society and the values that other people are prepared to fight for. It's really not that complicated. So what does that look like in practical terms? Lots of things. Be heard in terms of, your local representatives. Be heard in terms of ringing talk, but base level, ring talkback radio, write to the paper, buy the newspaper for heaven's sake, read the newspaper for heaven's sake, The Australian, obviously. But do not be passive and do not be a passenger and expect the destination to change.
I might invite, given you're closest to me, would you like to step up to the podium, because you're the one person who is blocked. So there we go. If
you cannot put a humanities professor on the podium and expect him to limit himself to 3 minutes. It's inhumane. I said earlier that Western society has two ancient constituting value strands, like its DNA, winding all the way through our institutions, our art, our practices, our values, our science, our religion. Any flourishing society needs its young people to understand those ancient and modern processes of value formation which have made them what they are. And ours is no exception. And the more diverse our society becomes, the more we need this centre to hold. Now, for 1,000 years or more, since 1088, when Bologna was created, our universities have traditionally had three strands. One was professional instruction, training, if you like, vocational training. One was what you might call pure knowledge, which we call roughly research now, and it matters a great deal, especially in the sciences. These are both critical. But there was a third strand, which the Greeks called phronesis. Broadly, it meant wisdom and character. And this is roughly the space of the humanities. History, which is fact, respect for fact. Philosophy, which is concept. And literature, which is lives. Three types of truth. And its business, the business of the humanities, was really the transmission of those values that I just mentioned. Our civilization is a process. It is a sense of transmission of practices and institutions and values that are inherited and then preserved and then passed on. And at least a representative selection of our brightest students really need to be doing this, to be learning this. But to a great extent, the modern university has given up on that third strand. The parts of the university responsible for the transmission have almost completely lost their reputation in wider society. The sector has become ideologised and fragmented, and we need to bring it back. This could be via reform of existing arts faculties and curriculums, or by the creation of a series of liberal arts colleges or similar institutions, but we need this far more than we need the same old rhetoric. I'm thinking back to John Dawkins in 1989. I know he's a Westerner. Everybody must go to university. Well, what is it that they're actually going to? That's the question. We fail to ask that question. And then as a related point, we need to incentivise teaching itself. Break that iron kind of nexus with research, where only the research part has the real prestige. High-level research, of course, absolutely essential, but so is careful, patient, inspiring teaching. And the research-driven system is actually driving good content-based teachers away. That means we also aren't training good secondary teachers. The university education faculties are not producing them, and the school system is not incentivising them. So, two things in the end. One, restore the humanities, the liberal arts, and two, make teaching great again.
Thank you very much, Professor Simon Haines. It's been a good day for the Greeks, actually. Simon, you've mentioned the contribution of the Greeks to this debate a number of times. And so on behalf of those whom I owe my origins to, thank you very much, including the current generation who carry the torch. Let's go right down to the end and work our way back to the middle. Professor Gary Banks, and a reset, Gemma, as we say in television and radio. So we're asking the question, what is it we can do to ensure Australia's continuing prosperity and the flourishing of its people? Gary.
Well, I guess the burden of my own talk was we sort of know what to do in the sense of the policies that would make us great, to use that term. It's how do we get them done? And it always comes down to political leadership. So then the question is, what are the conditions we need in this country for the right political leaders to take forward the right agenda? And there's a bunch of things. I think everybody here has raised some of them. But one of the points I've made when I've had opportunities to talk to senior people in different sectors is that there are leaders throughout the whole community who can make a hell of a difference. I think too often we've seen leaders in business defer to their business associations and so on to carry the weight when they could be making much more compelling arguments based on their hands-on experience in their own firms. And one of the good things that's happened, because there have been some good things, in fact, I feel more optimistic at the end of today than I was before, is that we are starting to see leaders in business and leaders in the community speaking up and saying things that they may not have said before. I think, that will make a big difference because it encourages others. And the only other point I would make is, there's a rich resource of ideas, of policy ideas produced by the sponsors of this program today and my old alma mater, etc. So they're waiting to be picked up. And I think, having people within the community take forward and show that these ideas have support will help with the political leadership that ultimately we're going to need.
Thank you. We'll come down the line and Scott, your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you, Basil. Be heard's a great phrase, and this afternoon I've already covered things where I think you should be heard. We all should be heard on the Nature Positive plan, on saving our energy systems, putting energy security and affordability and competitiveness first. So, but I've already done that. So what came to mind as I was walking up to the stage was the issue of statesmanship and political leadership, which has been touched on. And there was a great man, Winston Churchill, and he said this was his reflection about what is needed from political leadership. He said, "Tell the truth to the British people. They are a tough people, a robust people. They may be a bit offended at the moment, but if you have told them exactly what is going on, you have insured yourself against complaints and reproaches, which are very unpleasant when they come home on the morrow of some disillusion." So as we choose the road ahead, we need our political leaders to tell us the truth. Instead, what we have is we have an Inflation Reduction Act in America, which is actually about subsidising renewables. We don't have an act in a program in Australia called Lock Up 30% of the country. It's called the Nature Positive Plan. We don't have a let's put contractors out of business and force them into unions act. We have the Closing Loopholes Bill before Parliament. So that's the leadership we need, and I guess if there's a request of this audience is please, reach into your Australian roots as much as you can and just don't put up with any bullshit from politicians.
Scott, thank you, and noted, thank you. We move on to Brendan O'Neill. Brendan.
Thank you. Am I allowed to quote Trotsky, Scott? Do you mind? Trotsky once said that we should increase the power of man over nature and abolish the power of man over man. And none of us are Trotskyists. I know, I'm very much aware of that. But that's a pretty good way to approach political life and public life. I think we should increase the power that we wield over the natural world. Too often, the human footprint on the planet, as it's called, is seen as a shameful, dirty, polluting thing. I think it's a wonderful thing. We have tamed this crazy planet floating through space. We've exploited its resources, and as a consequence, we have improved human life immeasurably. When I think of something like the coal industry in Australia and the shamefacedness that people are supposed to feel about it, I want to grab people by the scruff of their necks and say, don't you understand the wonder of firstly discovering that there is ancient trapped sunlight in coal, secondly liberating it, and thirdly using it to power the modern world. This is something we should take immense pride in and never give an inch to those who call it criminal or polluting or damaging. This is a wonderful thing to increase man's power over nature. and abolish man's power over man. No more censorship, no more nanny statism, no more telling people how to live, how to raise their children, what they can think, what they can say, how they can conduct themselves. Let people live freely. So I would say what we need to do going forward is to humanize the planet and liberate humanity. Tame the planet using our intelligence and our machines, and let human beings make their own decisions for themselves.
Brendan, thank you. And on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for making the trip and being here. It's been fabulous and enlightening to hear your thoughts. Ditto, Dr. Bella de Brera. And Bella, I'm not sure if that was Gemma's answer to the question or not. And I suspect there might be a final comment still from Gemma. So I think you're the penultimate person. Have another go anyway, Gemma.
She's saying no. She's saying no.
I think it's... yeah, that's right. So our penultimate answer to that question.
All right, penultimate answer. We need to effect generational change immediately. And we need to do that by what I've said earlier, which is scrapping this appalling national curriculum, either scrapping it or taking out all the woke ideology. Either way, it has to go. We have to stop telling children lies because they believe them. We have to stop telling children that this country is racist, that it was invaded, that they should be ashamed of it. We have to stop telling them that climate change catastrophe is around the corner. We have to take the burden of guilt off children, and we have to stop terrifying them. They have to be allowed to be children again. And this is the only way that they're going to be able to lead flourishing lives, because they're currently being terrified and distracted from the real purpose of childhood. They're not being taught how to read and write. And for this country to flourish, we have to get the children back again. We have to rescue them. We have to cut woke ideology off at the knees.
The one thing I would say is to, and it's been threaded throughout all of the presentations and all of the conversations, is find your courage. What does that look like? It looks like something different for every single person in this room. It might be a conversation with a family member or someone that you work with. It might be drawing a line in the sand in your workplace about something, but we can't get anywhere without courage, and courage always costs. So be prepared to pay the cost, like counting. We're coming up to Anzac Day and people will call it, whatever day. Like Anzac Day, our freedom is such great price, the freedom that we have. Such great price. And I think, to your point, Bella, there's a generation of kids who don't understand that their parents and grandparents respectfully fight diabetes. They didn't fight Nazism, They don't understand the freedom that we walk in and the cost that it came. So I think, every day, look for opportunities to be courageous, look for opportunities to speak to our history, with a sense of pride and being unapologetic about it. And that felt very clumsy. So thanks, Baz, for that opportunity. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, one and all, please thank all of our panellists, John Anderson, Janet Albrechtson, Brendan O'Neill, Scott Hargraves, Professor Simon Haines, Dr. Bella de Brera, Professor Gary Banks, and Gemma Tognini. Please put your hands together for them.